and the book. Yeah, so let me start it again. So yeah, so today it's a book discussion series 2024, and the book that is edited by Professor David and Professor Krishna, Nepal's Dalits in Transition. So this book has come out, and this will be discussed in today's session. So yeah, I'll give the context of speakers. I'll introduce the speakers, who are they, and what works they have done in the past. So first, I would like to introduce. It will be my pleasure. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor David Gellner, who is a Professor Emeritus of Social Anthropology and Fellow of All Souls College, the University of Oxford. One more context I would like to give to all the participants, that All Souls College is very different from other colleges of University of Oxford. All Souls College only recruit fellows. They don't recruit undergraduate and postgraduate students. So this was very unique to me when I visited All Souls College and met Professor David. His very recent four books was launched. The first one was Borderland in Northern South Asia. Second was Religion, Secularism, and Ethnicity in Contemporary Nepal. Next, Nepali diaspora populations around the world, and research among Nepalis in the UK and Belgium. So, I mean, these were the very recent books, and more than that, if somebody wants to know more about his work, his scholarship, and his publications, I would request participants to visit his website. Also, his 2016 NC Regmi lecture, The Idea of Nepal, is available on Social Science Baha website, where participants can get more idea on the context of Nepal and his research around Nepal. He has carried out his field work in Nepal since 1981. So his work is totally around Nepal and the politics of Nepal, how marginalized community people navigate through it. And he has visited Nepal on many subsequent occasions, broadening his interest to include politics and ethnicity, healers, mediums, and popular approaches to misfortune, religious change, activism of all sorts, democratization, elections, borderlands, Dalits, and class formation. He was also principal investigator of the caste and culture, and Dalit Search for Dignity research projects. So, this is very brief introduction to Professor David. Now, I would like to introduce Professor Krishna P. Adhikari. He is a senior research fellow at the Institute of Social and Cultural Anthropology, University of the Oxford, and he was co-investigator of the ESRC-funded project Caste, Class, and Culture, Changing Bahun and Dalit Identities in Nepal, and the British Academy-funded project, the Dalit Search for Dignity, with Professor David. After 12 years as a practitioner and manager in the field of rural development, he did a PhD at the University of Reading in 2007, and the dynamics of social capital and community institutions. He has edited Nepalis in the United Kingdom, an overview published by the Center for Nepal Studies UK in 2012. So today again, the book that will be discussed is Nepal's Dalit in Transition, and it has 13 chapters. I went through the review, so we'll be getting the first-hand writing experience, first-hand information from Professor David and Krishna. So the session first, Professor David will be speaking for almost 30 to 40 minutes, and then after we'll move to Krishna. Meanwhile, we'll keep taking questions. So if participants have any questions, kindly write it to the chat box. We'll take it, and then after, at the end of the session, we'll give these questions to specific speakers. If you want to ask specific questions to specific speakers, kindly mention it to the chat. So now I would like to invite Professor David to speak on the book Nepal's Dalits in Transition.
Okay, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. One thing since this is aimed at the Indian audience, one thing you didn't mention is I have, apart from working mainly on Nepal, obviously, I have also done some research in Gorakhpur in Eastern UP with my colleagues and friends.
Sorry, David, can I interrupt? I need to
Yes.
ask Vidyasagar for permission to upload our file. We got PowerPoint here.
Krishna, I've allowed that. I think you can access it now. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So I was just mentioning, yeah, I have done a little bit of research in Eastern UP with Sanjay Kumar Pandey, who's at I believe I think I saw his name online, and he teaches at JNU, so I'm sure many of you know him, and also Shashank Chaturvedi, who's also from Gorakhpur. So we've done a couple of articles, and our third substantial research article about the recent Indian elections is currently under review, I hope. So I hope it will be out very soon. So yes, so this research, now how this is going to work, we're going to give you the whole context, if you like, about the book. So I'll leave right to the very end as kind of actual looking at the particular chapters and the topics that are covered by the book. But so we're giving you the complete complete package, if you like, the kind of research that lies behind it. And this, we hope this is just the beginning. This book, we plan a proper monograph that sums up all of our research on caste and class and culture. And that will going to take a long time, I think, to kind of really get on top of it. And the first thing to say, I mean, since you're interested in methodology, is that all research and all scholarship is collaborative. So even if there's only one person's name on the front of the book, it depends very heavily on collaboration and cooperation and working together with many other people. And as you'll see, Krishna and I are just the tip of the iceberg here. We have very complementary skills, I'm glad to say, and I don't think either of us could do it without the other. So let's plunge in. I think, do you want to go to Krishna? It's at the moment I'm at least seeing two slides at once. So I don't know if you can go to full screen on the main slide. Now you need to click on the little thing at the bottom. That's it. Wonderful. Okay. So I think, I mean, for present purposes, it's important to say a little bit about, so since some of you it's possible that some of you may even never have been to Nepal and therefore not know. And one very important thing about the relationship between India and Nepal, first of all, of course, its size. India is about 50 times bigger than Nepal, which probably won't come as news to you. The second thing to say is there's a huge knowledge asymmetry. That is to say, most Indians are very ignorant about Nepal. They know it's got mountains. They know it's a nice place to go for a honeymoon. And they may have seen some backdrops in Bollywood films, but they don't actually know much about it. Whereas most Nepalis are extremely knowledgeable about India. They all have a passive knowledge about Hindi, but they don't. Of course, they all understand Hindi, and many of them speak it quite well, partly because of movies and TV and so on. They don't much like it when Indians come to Nepal and automatically assume that everyone understands Hindi, because it's sort of there's a kind of nationalist thing going on there. So there's, as I say, many Nepalis work in India, many have studied there, so they know a lot. They understand Hindi. They know a lot about India. Indians don't know so much about Nepal. There is a significant cultural continuity. So many Westerners, they ask me naive questions like, do Nepalis have caste like India? Yes, they do. In Nepal is culturally, historically, linguistically, it is continuous with North India. It is absolutely continuous with North India. It's part of the larger South Asian cultural area. In a way, it's just, I mean, my Nepali friends, don't shoot me, but I believe it's a historical fact that it's an accident. It's an accident of history that Nepal has ended up as a separate country. It could have, if history had been different in various ways, it could have ended up as as part of the Indian Union, but it hasn't, and it won't now. But they have a strong sense of difference. But nonetheless, Nepali and Hindi are basically mutually comprehensible. There's about 70% vocabulary overlap. 80% of Nepalis are Hindus. Their holy places are in India, and many Indians come to Pashupatinath and Mankamana and other holy places in Nepal. There is very much a continuity. Nepal, I mean, to put it in a nutshell, culturally speaking, Nepal is closer to North India than North India is to South India. And I think that's an unarguable fact of history and society. Nonetheless, there are some things which make Nepal distinct. One of them is the survival of Indian. But Indian Buddhism doesn't exist in India anymore. It's been revived in a completely new form, a new Ambedkarite form. But Indian Buddhism survives in Nepal in the Kathmandu Valley, absolutely continuous with the great Buddhist monasteries and culture of what was, of the area that we now call West Bengal, Bangladesh, Bihar. Where does the name Bihar come from? It comes from the Bihar means in Buddhist monastery. So that's and there are other sort of cultural distinctions, but essentially, as I say, the really important point is that Nepal is south-facing, not north-facing. There is a tiny minority of Nepali citizens who are Tibetan in culture and look north, but for 98% of the population, they basically look, culturally speaking, look southwards. There are some important differences, of course, and political history does make a difference. So in India, you're still having the big argument about whether there should be a caste census. Nepal has had a caste census since 1991. Another big difference is that what in Nepal are now called Janajati, what India would call tribals, are much more numerous than they are in most parts. Obviously, Northeast India is an exception of a different situation, but the Janajatis, what used to be called hill tribes, they amount to at least a third, maybe more than a third of, depending on how you count and who you include, of the population. So, in other words, they're very large. And that means they occupy, politically speaking, they occupy the space that is occupied by OBCs in India. Okay, so they're not OBCs, they're Janajati, but they're in a kind of, in terms of political calculations, that's the space that they occupy. And now in Nepal does now have reservations like in India, but they're much, much more recent than India. So you do not have this long history. You do not have the emergence of a Dalit middle class as you have in India. There is, it is emerging, but it's so far tiny. So it hasn't had the kind of political influence that you see in North India. Migration, both countries have a huge amount of migration outwards. Of course, India is so big that a lot of the migration is within India. So many Nepalis go to, as I'm sure you all know, go to work and run the momo trade and the chowkidars up and down but even though in absolute numbers the numbers of Indians migrating to the Gulf is obviously much higher than the number of Nepalis, but per capita it is higher in Nepal. So pretty much almost every single household, and we'll show you some figures later, has somebody, at least one person who's been abroad. I can't read the last bit of the slide because it's cut off. Anyway, let's have the next slide, Krishna, because I'm already taking too much time. So this is just to show you the terminology that we use to discuss the broad social categories in Nepal and how that has changed. And nearly all the terms are new. Okay, and this is the product of demography. It's the product of democracy, the kind of processes, the importance of caste politically, as caste declines in some senses in terms of ritual purity, but it becomes more important politically, and those processes we've been able to observe them in India for more than 70 years now. These have really got going since 1990. Before 1990, there was the Panchayat regime. You had no political parties. You didn't have open political competition. Now you do. So you've got these brand new terms, these neologisms that have come into existence. So Dalit, interestingly, Dalit is very widely understood in Nepal, even though it's brand new for Nepal. It didn't exist before 1990. I can promise you that. I lived there for 2 years. Nobody used the term or understood or have heard of the term Dalit. Now everybody does. Why does everybody understand it, even the least educated and least politically involved people? Because it corresponds to a pre-existing, really important social divide. Okay, so the Dalit is the new politically correct name for what used to be called in Nepali they were called small Sanojat, and in the very old days, they were called legally. They were called those whose touch requires purification, or simply achut and so on. Those are the kind of old terms. But now we use the term Dalit, although, as we will come to, many Dalits are actually very unhappy with the term and would like to replace it with something else, but there's no agreement on what. Janajati itself is also a neologism. Interestingly, that is less well understood, hasn't caught on in the same way that Dalit has. It has caught on, but not as much. I've done some semi-systematic investigations asking every taxi driver I ever used, whether they understand it. About half do and half don't. And finally, the most recent term to be invented is Kas Arya. That Kas for the Chetris, Arya for the Bahuns, the Brahmins. Between them, they are just under a third, and that is again brand new term. Lots of people don't understand it, don't use it, but it's the term. It's the kind of omnibus term, the clubbing together category for what in India will be called general castes. And then there's Madeshi, which are the people of Indian culture and language, the Bhojpuri speakers, the Maithili speakers, the Awadhi speakers in the southern plains, who are identical in terms of language and culture and religion with the people on the other side of the border in India, and indeed still continue to marry with them. Okay, Krishna, let's move on. So that's just to give you the kind of the relationship between Nepal and India, but in a nutshell. So our first project was called Caste, Class and Culture, and it was in the Middle Hills near Pokhara, and we dealt with a cluster of 6 villages, and we wanted to look at this holistically. We had a whole team. Our Arjun Bika was also full-time 2-year postdoctoral, not postdoctoral, but research officer on the project, because it was essential, obviously, to involve Dalits themselves in research on Dalits. And we also had a large team of surveyors. So it was a combination of qualitative and quantitative. We don't have time today to go into the kind of life histories and a lot of the qualitative research that we collected, but I assure you that we did have a huge amount of that. And we've also, what we are going to give you an idea about is the quantitative material, which required a whole team that Krishna organized and motivated to carry it out. And, to put it in most bluntly, why is it we wanted to of course, we know in very broad outlines, we know the answer, but this was to try and be more precise, more scientific, if you like, about the answer. Why do Bahuns do so well and Dalits do so badly in the modern economy and politics and so on. Okay, next slide. Yeah. And theoretically, the idea that we had was we wanted to play with this idea of distinction and taste from Pierre Bourdieu. Some of you may have read this book, or at least looked at it. It's a big fat book. I doubt there are actually many people who've read every single word from front cover to cover, because it's a monster compilation. And the basic idea, and it often appears in lists of, what are the 10 greatest sociological works of the 20th century? This often appears. And you may think, it's normal to think in modern society that your taste in what kind of music you like to listen to, what kind of novels you like to read, what kind of films you enjoy, that is your personal choice, that is your individual, unique autonomy to choose those kind of things. Bourdieu says no. All of that is determined by your class and your class background. And and not only that, not only is it determined by your class background, it actually is a key part of reproducing your class. Now, one of the kind of nice little ironies is that, of course, Pierre Bourdieu's own biography contradicts his theory. So Bourdieu himself, if Bourdieu's theory was absolutely correct, Bourdieu would never have become Bourdieu. He would have remained a peasant in the southwest of France. But no, he became the most influential intellectual in France and rose to the top of the French academic system. So his own personal biography disproves his own theory in one sense. But I mean, he would say, well, individuals, it doesn't matter. We're talking about the generality of the thing. So we want to take some of these ideas and see to what is the role, if any, of culture in reproducing these differences and these hierarchies. Okay, next slide, please. Krishna, next slide, please. So more closer to us in time and in social space is a book which very much is inspired by Bourdieu and tries to update it. And this is a very nice book, which I recommend to you, Culture, Class, Distinction. It was produced by a group of sociologists at different universities in the UK. Some were at Liverpool, Manchester, some were in the Open University. And Mike Savage then left and is now at the LSE. And they tried to operationalize and actually use Bourdieu's framework to investigate the role of culture in perpetuating class within Britain today. And so we started from their set of items to investigate, and obviously we left out visual art, and there's no point in asking somebody living in a Nepalese village, how many times do you go to the opera, or how many times do you go to museums? That doesn't make sense for them. So we had to adapt it. Obviously we had to include religion as a category, which is something which the UK team didn't do, but that was our immediate inspiration. Next slide, please. So we, and in addition to the qualitative ethnography, we took the 7 main caste groupings, and they're not all of the same size. So anyway, within the 6 cluster of 6 villages, there are 3 types of Dalit, 2 types of Brahmin, and Gurungs, the Janjati group. Interestingly, they came later to this particular area, and then also the Chetris. So that gives you and we surveyed all of them in a first stage household census. Next slide. And then what we did was, when we wanted to look at this idea of cultural capital and cultural consumption, we tried to get, it was slightly more purposive. So because we wanted to have, because of the different groups, the 7 different caste groups are not all the same size, but so in 1 or 2 of them we took all of them, and then in others we obviously stratified sample of households. We resurveyed those households, and then within those households we interviewed every individual over the age of 13, and we collected a huge amount of material about what kind of radios do they like to listen to, what kind of films do they like, what kind of songs and singers do they like, what kind of sports do they do, etc., for all of those individuals. And that our kind of analysis of that material is still very much underway, and a matter largely for the future. Next slide, please. Then the second project, which was more intermittent and much smaller scale, was to look at how are Dalits treated in the school curriculum as of now in social studies in Nepali schools. And Krishna carried out various piloting of new lessons. We thought it was a very good moment, because it was the moment when federalism was properly being introduced, and education was being devolved down to the to the provinces, and they actually had to come up with their own educational policies. So we thought it was a really good moment to try and influence those new educational policies to have a more pro-Dalit, more enlightened way of teaching about caste issues in the school curriculum. Okay, next slide. And the final project was an attempt to take the methodology of the first project and adapt it and carry it out in a culturally rather different part of the country, that's say the far west, which is poorer. It's much closer to Uttarakhand in India. For many of the people in the far west, they don't go to Kathmandu. It's much easier for them to go to Delhi or to Lucknow. And so we then try to reproduce, but with a big focus on Dalits in the far west, both in the Terai down in the plains and up in Bajang district, a famous historical district up in the mountains. Next. And these were the key questions, and we wanted to try and find out, when and under what circumstances was it helpful to mobilize Dalitness as a label, and when was it not helpful? Okay, next slide. And as I say, we tried to replicate the methods in a very culturally quite different place, and we also made a big effort to try and involve Nepali scholars teaching in University in Pokhara. So Anshula, who's on the call, I think was one of them. And we had these sort of special work packages that were part of the project as well. Okay, next slide. Right, so I think that's over to you, Krishna, for the next bit.
All right. Hi, thank you, David. For the background and introducing the research we have been carrying out. I am in this segment going to give you the tester of some quantitative data. Of course, not everything can be captured, and also this forms the background of the book that we've been talking about. So this presentation, basically based on the quantitative data, gives some idea about the changing or unchanging caste relations in Nepal. Will be selected to include education, migration, skills, and occupational changes, everyday socialization, and the caste relations. Maybe I might touch upon Tarai Dalits and summarize before I hand over to David to make final conclusions and talk more about the book. Right, just to give you an idea of the Dalit literacy in Nepal. Nepal was pretty much closed until 1950s. The education was kept by the rulers to themselves. Public were kept away from the access to education. So Nepal's literacy rate was about 5% at that time, and we didn't have any figure about the Dalits then, but we can assume that it was near close to zero. Since 1991, Nepal started doing census based on caste and ethnicity, unlike in India. So now it's been possible to find out disaggregated data. And we can see that as Nepal makes progress towards literacy, Dalits also are closing the gap, though they lag behind all others. I don't know, surprisingly, for whatever reasons, the 2021 census data has not been provided by caste and ethnicity. We asked a number of questions related to education. Education forms a significant part of our research, but one aspect we were interested to understand was what's happening about the Dalit participation in school enrollment. This provides a disaggregated picture by age, gender, and caste. The people in our sample who were 50 plus, we can see here that about 23% of Brahmin Kshatri male had never been to school, as opposed to 98% of the Dalit women and 87% of Brahmin Kshatri women. So the education was, women and the Dalits were kept away from education in the past. That's reflected here. But if we look at the 26 to 50 age group, that goes down, and it comes to those below 25 years of age. We interviewed people 13 years or older. That there's nobody is there is none who never been to school. So that means it's a kind of the changing picture here can be seen here, generational shift. Going to school is one thing, but caste discrimination experience in school is altogether another. If you interview, most of our interviews, they all have got so many stories to tell about how they face in school. But this also disaggregated by age can give us a changing picture here. For example, the Dalit, above 50 years of age, almost all here, I think is a 7 in 10 had some kind of a discrimination experience in school. But this goes down when we take the 26 to 50 years old, and those up to 25 years old age is much smaller, though they experience some form of the caste and other type of experiences. So this is the same thing presented in 5 different age categories. The older the people, they had a lot more discrimination experience in the school as opposed to the younger generation. Then being literate or joining school is one thing, but continuing it and achieving the making educational achievements and finishing school is a different issue. School here, the green said, you can say that that's the school leaving certificate, passing which is very important for one to apply for government job or to get into universities. You can see that the red shade here implies the share of illiterate people in each categories. For the Dalit on the right, here we can see that the literacy people who are illiterate are relatively higher than the other groups. But when it comes to passing that school level examinations, their share, number of those who have passed is very, very small compared to others. We also ask questions about the parental aspirations of passing that iron gate, if you like. And we can see here that disaggregated by age again. On the left, only Brahmin Kshatriya males, about half, had aspirations to, pass those stages and go further. For all others, including Dalit women and women, the Brahmin Kshatriya women, it was almost nil. They had no aspirations. So that's why, the illiteracy figure I presented before also was so low. But as we move to the age group, for those below 20 up to 25, this aspirations has gone up. For example, the green figure for the Brahmin Kshatriya male is 9 out of 10 they aspire to pass the exams, and even the blue one on the left here for the Dalit women, about 7 in 10 would like now, their parents would like their daughters to cross that stage. Moving away from education, a quick test about the international migration that David also flagged. International labor migration has been a big phenomena in recent days. It has not only helped break down the traditional occupational relations, but also open up opportunity, different other types of opportunities. We can see that here on average, 70 point. I mean, in this study, 78% of the households had at least one member who had been abroad at least once, and on average, Dalit have the higher figure. 88%, I mean 9 out of 10 households had at least somebody who had been away. In our study area, the Gurungs on average also had high percentage. But going abroad is one thing, but where do they go is altogether another is matters, because the migration is hierarchized by destinations. Going to advanced Western countries where there are better earning opportunities, better quality of life is, as opposed to India being very easy to go, but, but a lot of insecurity and the low earning opportunities there. Looking from that point of view, Vishwakarma, Pariyar, and Mija, which are the three hill Dalit, major Dalit groups here, we can see that, for Vishwakarma and Pariyars, almost everyone had been to either India or the Gulf. Mijar, they are the leather workers. They are relatively affluent in this area. They have managed to have some of the family members to go to places like Korea. So, for example, here Gurungs, because of their association to Gorkha services and British military, they were able to go in a higher number in more advanced countries. So this kind of the differentiation of inequality can be seen in terms of the migration destination. We also asked about the changes in people's skills, because skills are related, important because they are related to heritage, but also they also show that what's happening on the traditional occupation. And we categorize the changes we experience. We ask respondents basically, we identify a set of skills locally available, and we ask participants that whether they had those skills. Whether or not they had those skills, we also ask them that if their parents had those skills in order to identify the changes. And we have categorized them into 4 different types. One that become quite more widespread on the left to the very steep decline to the right. I'm now going to highlight those related to Dalit. The modern tailoring related to Pariyar caste, Dalit caste, has actually increased even beyond Dalit groups. Playing musical instruments by that also by pariah Dalits also hasn't declined that much. The young generation showing interest in it, but the traditional tailoring skills, have now gone down, and the skills that are related to Dalits, caste-based occupations, for example, plowing, plow making, blacksmithing, even carpentry and masonry, which are more related to Dalits, or have gone down in a massive way, which is now this figure presents in percentage. These red bars indicate the skill changes, and those below 0% in the negative side shows that they are declined. For example, here the leather work in hill of Nepal, especially in the area where we carried out studies, it doesn't exist at all. That's why this in the decline is the highest number. Right, we're also interested to understand what's happening on the pattern client systems, which are similar to Jajamani system in India. Those related to Dalit in this area of Nepal. I mean, this is called differently in different parts, like Riti Bhagya system in the far west, but in Kaskian, is surrounding area is known as the Baligare system. Those related to Dalit, we have identified three: one plowman, or the tailor, and the third iron, which is again the iron smiths doing producing agricultural implement. So we found that this traditional system on which the service provider provides service throughout the year, and they are paid in grain after the harvest. So these kind of systems are breaking down and being replaced by very much market-based system. So the large number of people now said they no longer practice. In the past, they used to be a kind of the asset or treasure in which a service provider would inherit their client and divide between their brothers. So in 2015-16, when we conducted this research, the mean year of discontinuation was in a range between 14 to 18 years. So these things, at least in our research sites, were breaking down and being replaced by more market-based systems, more tailor shops open in the market, and the people were free to have go wherever they like and be paid in the cash. So what about those caste-based untouchability, everyday socialization? This is a bit complex, and we know that every Dalit you interview, have big story to tell about, discrimination they face in every state. So there's no need to, do a lot of histories to understand that. But what's happening is that changing. What's the state of our society? In order to understand that, we try to measure this more quantitatively, asking people about whether they sit together at home and in public, because there is a clear public-private divide. What about future prospects? What about the interdining at home and in public? And so forth. Also, inviting people in family events like wedding, participating in funeral activities, and so on. The left reddish bar is about Kaski. It shows that the sitting together at home, about half of our respondents said they have done that, whereas the other halves haven't done that, as opposed to 92%, which is 9 in 10 people have done in public, sitting together. Also in the future, the same number of people said they would do it. And eating together, interdining is much less. Only 1/3 have done that at home, but when it comes to public, 8 out of 10 people have eaten together, with the people across the Dalit, non-Dalit caste divide. And the future prospect also quite similar to that public figure. But when it comes to inviting in wedding as equal, on equal footing as a guest, as opposed to somebody related to pattern client relations and doing the all kind of jobs. So at least in Caste's scenario, less than half the respondents said they invited, and in the future they will do more. Of course, we can see regional differences. Let me just not spend a lot of time here. In the interest of time, I'll move. As we clearly have seen that there is a public-private divide, but we were interested to understand, because since migration is such a huge thing, what happens in the migration destinations? And the people who we interviewed were migrating mostly to Middle East and Malaysia. We found out that about 9 in 10 people had at least someone from Dalit, non-Dalit caste divide, sharing kitchen and sharing their house, living place. And they said that, about 9 out of 10 people had no issue, no exclusion, no discrimination faced. They were quite, live together as if they're from the same family. We collected a lot of qualitative information to back this up, which there's no time to present, but this gives idea. But we asked them that what happens when they come back? Can they treat each other in the same way when they come back home? The non-Dalits, more than 60% non-Dalits say no, they cannot. They had to, they will revert back to the, the same old thing. This doesn't mean that they will not change, but I think they will practice the same thing they had before. So that shows the nature of the caste relations, how stubborn it is, despite what happens away from home in the migration destinations. We did collect thorough data on the caste, marriage practices and intercaste marriages. Just to give a general impression that the widowhood marriage is partly observed, but there are several cases that the remarriage is also occurring, but that taboo still is there in place. Goal child marriages in Caste and migration destinations, it doesn't exist, but it does exist in Baque, where we had our second project, and also Bajang and the Western Nepal. Intercaste marriages are increasingly acceptable in the hills, more in Caste than Bajang. But when it comes to Dalit, non-Dalit intercaste marriages, these are rares and are not tolerated very well. Despite saying those, we found a few families, Dalit men marrying non-Dalit women, and they were subsisting well, especially in the migration destination like Chittagong and other places. But when it comes Dalit, non-Dalit intercaste marriages in Western Nepal, far West Nepal, Bajang, they are not unthinkable, but it doesn't mean that they haven't happened. When they have happened, people are made to have to vanish to India. It will be very hard to live in those places. In Tarai, Baque, Dalit, non-Dalit intercaste, even intercaste marriages in general are not that much, and I don't think Dalit and non-Dalit intercaste marriage would be tolerated there. So we're interested also to understand economic relations, though we have seen the migration happening, opening up new opportunities, and also breaking down of the pattern-client relations. We're interested, so we developed an index with the thorough and granular data we collected in Caste. We collected people's wealth status, their income, their consumptions, their family size, and so on, and develop an index, wealth index. And we try to plot this by caste. The Dalits being plotted towards the right, and Brahmin Chedrich on the left, and the Janjati group being an exception because of their military services and migration to the advanced countries, and also land holding. A kind of the rough, not perfect, but the weak the correlation does exist here, because if you see here, the blue said for the Dalit Pariar, and the one up the red color here, more than 50% of the Dalit Pariars are either of the low category or very low. But all caste groups have at least someone in the very high group as well. But when it comes for Dalit, the share is very small. So that's the situation here. In our second studies in Bajang and Bake, the same kind of index is yet to be prepared, but based on the self-reported data from ranging in the 7 category, again, from the very low to very high, we didn't find a similar kind of pattern because, for example, in far west Bajang, the Thakuri caste groups, they are relatively poor. This is self-reported data again. But still, when it comes to Dalits are poorer than others. Then we ask people about their perception of the family well-being. Compared to your family's economic status 25 years ago, how do you see it now? And the result is very encouraging here. Almost everyone, about 8 out of 10 people said their status has either highly improved or improved. This is the data from Caste. Only 15% said no change, and those who thought family position has degraded were only marginal 5%. And broken down by caste, here towards the right, the 2 Dalit groups, they reported that their situation highly improved or improved. And similar results were found in our second study in Bake and Bajang. So there is a wider held perception that the economic situation has changed. I think in the interest of time, maybe I should skip these ones. In Tarai, the situation in Tarai, the discrimination the people in Tarai face is a lot more. They face discrimination from the Pahari-led establishment, from Hill Dalits, and the social stratification and discrimination within the Tarai society is much more strict. And also there is a hierarchy within Dalits, and the discrimination facing from Dalits themselves. But this picture, I think I would like to show about the literacy rates. We talked about education before, but it's very interesting here to see that the Nepal's literacy figure from 2021. I mean, even though we have got latest literacy figure for 2021 census, we didn't have a disaggregated figure by caste. This one shows that the top 3 literacy rates here on the left of this figure, more than 80% of literacy belonging to the Tarai groups, here Caste, Marwari, and Devs, and even the Tarai Brahmin Chatis. But on the other hand, the literacy rate, lowest literacy rates, 10 out of 9 are from Tarai, and 5 Tarai Dalit groups are the least literate here. And you can see here the Musahar and Doms, they have only 1 out of 1 in 5 people who is literate. This kind of the huge differentiation is out there. The situation Tarai is even more stark. Just to summarize, maybe there is no need to summarize it because you have already must have some sense. But just to recap, is that the literacy rate is rising. There's a high aspirations. Declining caste rate of discrimination is in school, but the problem of huge inequalities, big dropouts, and minimal entry to the higher education institutions of Dalits. And when it comes to occupational successes, that is very, very, very limited. Migration, Dalits have participated in international migration in a huge scale, but inequalities of the hierarchy of destinations and earnings remain there. Traditional occupation and skills, occupation based on pattern-client relations are breaking down. New trends are emerging, but these have not gone fully away, and loss of skills and heritage. But also for many people, I think the breaking down of traditional occupation also would mean that challenges to the subsistence, their livelihood. Social relations, limited changes on caste-based untouchability. I mean, the changes, is very much positional, depending on who you ask. David would highlight, and we can discuss more later. And for some, the changes are so huge, and for others, the changes are none, in a very, very small. Participation in social events, interdining, intercaste marriage is increasingly accepted, but there is clear public-private divide. Regional differences occurs. From Eastern Nepal to Western Nepal, there's a huge difference, stark differences, variation. Dalit, non-Dalit, and inter-Dalit marriages are very much still forbidden and sometimes met with violence. Economic outlook, there is a sense of perceived economic improvement, though it is imperfect and at times weak. Some level of caste-class correlation exists. Wider spread, but the problem is that there is a wider spread landlessness. Dalits are, most Dalits are landless, and they have the highest level of poverty, and there is also huge internal variation. And in terms of representation, I mean, I didn't present any figure, but thanks to the reservation in public services, in politics, the political representation has increased, and we can discuss this later if necessary. And there is some limited representation in public services, thanks to the reservation that Nepal started since 2007. But politically, Dalits are still underrepresented, except in the local governments world level, where they are overrepresented. And public services, no representation in the higher levels. And most marginalized people, we had one special work package to understand on the ground whether everybody was taking benefit of the system, and most marginalized people were still very much excluded. I think with this, I now hand it over to David to summarize. Thank you.
Okay, let me just very briefly before we, because what we really want is to have a discussion. Perhaps those who are not speaking could mute themselves. I think I can hear somebody who's not muted. And so let me just briefly say something about the book. So the book was initially some of the contributions to the book appeared in a special issue of Contributions to Nepalese Studies, but we weren't satisfied with that. We didn't feel we had enough coverage. We had no, at that time, we had no chapter on the Dalits in the Tarai, and we recruited various people to fill these gaps. So the gaps that we specifically sought out that we wanted covered were particularly about how Dalits fare in the labor market. So we had Ram Prasad Mainalik produce a kind of economic analysis of that, how they're still discriminated in that sphere. And as I said, we got Raksharam Harijan, who's a lawyer, to help. And in the end, Krishna and I both ended up writing this as well on Dalits in the Tarai. Since they are about, in terms of numbers, they are about half the population of the hill Dalits, and they, as Krishna was indicating, they're much less well off, and they're also considerably less well off than their caste fellows over the border in India. And so, yeah, they really are the most deprived, and especially, and as Krishna indicated, they're very much subdivided by caste themselves, and it's the lowest groups within who are the most poor and deprived. And then we also have this excellent article about the Dalit movement itself by somebody, Karel and Manuel Suji, about from a gender perspective, because of which is of course very crucial. And then finally, how has the introduction of reservations been working? How is it working? We've got an excellent analysis of that for the Nepali case, which I think will be extremely relevant for anyone working on India and who's interested in the position of Dalits in India, by Ramesh Sunam and Krishna Shrestha. And what they show is that essentially it is working well, but they also demonstrate that exactly the same criticisms that you will be very familiar with from India. And we have the Prime Minister of Nepal saying, are we going to choose the cricket team by reservations next? This the same kind of objections and whataboutery that you get in India. And they just go through those objections one by one and with evidence base, and look forward to how is reservation going to play out in the Nepalese case. And we've also got several chapters which came through from the original special issue about Dalit experience, and very kind of moving article in a way by Steve Fulmer about the effects of the earthquake, and where he basically shows that the stress of being a Dalit is so great that actually the earthquake didn't make much difference to Dalits. It's other groups. There's a measurable difference after the earthquake in the levels of people's mental distress and anxiety. But for Dalits, they're already at those levels just by the stress of their position within society. And Arjun Bika, who is our co-worker for the project, is very kind of reflexive, self-aware look at what does it feel like to be a Dalit in the hill villages, and what are the implications of that for leadership. And Joanna Pawlowska about the experience, detailed analysis of those few Dalits who do make it through to tertiary education. What has been their experience? And Tilak Vishwakarma, very interesting, and something that I think nobody really knew about before, the various ways in the Terai where Dalits can sometimes be incorporated into a new caste when you have Dalit, non-Dalit marriages. And he has a detailed analysis of about 15 different cases where this has happened. So, okay, if we could have the next slide. I mean, and one thing I will say is that there have been many collective volumes on Dalits in Nepal in contemporary times. I think ours is the only one that's really empirically based, tries to cover a lot of bases, and also has an index. So of course we have great monographs like Mary Cameron's path-breaking monograph and still unequaled monograph on Dalits in far west Nepal, but that's now quite dated. But this is the first attempt to kind of have an overview, if I say so myself. What are some of the key concepts that we're advancing? One is this: we've put forward this idea of negative cultural capital. You can just call it stigma if you like. That goes together with being a Dalit, which sort of explains why many Dalits don't like the term Dalit. And there's a very nice quote here, which we've given here from Comrade Ahuti's book about how, well, basically summing up what we're calling negative cultural capital. And a comment from Durga Sob, who's well-known feminist Dalit activist, about how, pointing out, which many people have pointed out, that when so-called high castes take up a Dalit profession, it somehow doesn't have any stigma, but when Dalits do it, it does. What about the term transition? So it's clear the term transition, what work is that doing? It's pointing to the fact that there is definitely change, and we chose the cover of the book precisely to illustrate the fact that Dalits are definitely changing, and for the better. But what are they? What is it a transition to? That is much less clear, and it's not obvious that the whole caste problem is going to be annihilated in Ambedkar's term. That is going to take a very long time, and it's in there are multiple directions. It's not so obvious the origin point is clear, the destination is not. Okay, final slide. And we have the final chapter in the book is just and this is an empirical, this is not normative. We're not saying this is what Dalits should do. We're simply trying to describe what options do we see being on the table, as it were. What directions could these, and this is obviously, these are ideal types. There's very much idealized, these are, and there may well be others that we failed to think of, and clearly in actual practice, particular individual activists will very likely combine more than one of these options. But we wanted to just be clear about what are the options, even if it's in an ideal typical way. And we've summed it up with the acronym ARERE, A-R-E-R-E. So starting with assimilation, so obviously that is one direction. Some Dalits just want to adopt high caste surnames. They do not want their children to have to live with this stigma or to think that they're somehow different. And there are some upwardly mobile middle class Dalits who maybe do achieve this. Then the second option is to go for reparation for the long history of injustice and inequality and suppression that Dalits have suffered. And of course, that requires the complete opposite. That instead of assimilating, it requires you have to stand up and say, I am a Dalit and I demand these changes for a millennia of injustice that we've had to go through. The third possibility is the ethnicizing identity, which also requires one to stand out, but this is the one which would like to get rid of the term Dalit and go for something, a more positive term like Shilpi, that would point to the positive heritage of Dalit castes. Fourth is revolution, and most obviously incarnated by the Maoist position before they became mainstream and before they gave up their revolutionary ambitions, and is still maintained by a few tiny breakaway factions. And I suppose Comrade Ahuti himself, probably best known intellectual and poet, might stand for that option. And then finally, exit, as in the famous trio of loyalty, exit, voice, or exit. And this is where you try to just leave Nepali society. And some Dalits believe that they are leaving Nepali society by becoming Christian, others by migrating to abroad, and so on. So that's, I think that's our final slide. That's the book. Maybe go back, Krishna, so people can see the table of contents of the book. Yes, that one. Yeah. And let's have a discussion. I'm sorry we've taken slightly too long, but there we go. I'd like to know what other people think.
Yeah, so thank you, Professor David. I just went through the introduction and I found a very interesting fact over there that Hill Dalits consist of 8.1% of population, according to 2011 census. And in 1990s, there were only 0.01% representation in the top public jobs in Nepal. So, that was interesting fact that I got to see. What's the condition right now? If my question came out of that sentence, can you brief on it?
Political representation massively changed with the 2008 Constituency Assembly elections, because it was proportional representation and there were reservations. So that was a historic number of Dalits were elected, both some even by the direct elections. There was the constituencies, although less so, and many through the proportional list. So the number of Dalits went up massively in 2000. There was a slight decline in subsequent elections. Yeah, but compared to the past, massive change, huge change.
Thank you. So now I would like to request all the listeners and participants to just raise your hand, and whatever question you have for the discussion, kindly you can unmute yourself and you can ask, or if you want to write it to the chat box, please feel free to do that.
Thank you, David and Krishna, for very interesting presentations. Very interesting book and very useful for Nepalese studies. When I'm listening to you both, I didn't hear anything about Newa Dalits, though they are not happy calling themselves Dalit. We still have low caste people like in Hill Brahmin Kshatric community. Was it intentional?
There's only so much you can include in one presentation. They are briefly mentioned in the in the book, although there isn't a separate chapter on them. Yes, this is we're getting really down into the weeds, the nitty-gritty details of Nepal's ethnography of Nepal, which may seem slightly obscure to Indian listeners. Yeah, the Newas of the Kathmandu Valley are divided by caste. This is an ethnographic fact. From an activist point of view, this is a very unfortunate fact, and Newa activists have managed to persuade the leaders of the caste, which, as Balgopal says, should be called Dalits, that they are not Dalits. They should be listed under Janajatis as a Newa and not listed under Dalits. And that's possibly not an advantage to them, because that means they're not excluded from the reservations that Dalits would otherwise have. But they are, they're, in terms of numbers, they are relatively small. some of them are still extremely poor. Some of them have done quite well. So, and whether the Khadgi butcher caste in among the Newars should really count as Dalits or not is, some of them are quite wealthy, but of course they still face the same caste discrimination from so-called high caste Newars as others. But yeah, it's a big issue for Newars, but I don't think it's a big issue for many others. It's interesting, though, in terms of the history of the Dalit movement in Nepal, that it really started with Newar Dalits. And Sahasranath Kapali was a Newar, and he was the one who led the campaign for temple entry to Pashupatinath, national, the most important Hindu shrine in Nepal. So it's significant, but I don't think, if we're looking at Nepal as a whole, and we're sort of comparing Nepal to India, it's an interesting but a relatively minor point, I think. Hence, that's why we didn't have time to kind of go into those kinds of details.
Thank you.
Hello. Yeah.
Okay. Can I? Who is? You can.
Yeah. Balkrishna.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Gellner. He was my examiner when I did my studies. So I'm very glad to listen this presentation today on the book, especially on Nepal's Dalits in transition. Of course, this is a short presentation. Probably there will be many detailed studies in the book, and I don't have the copy of it. My only question is, because I did something on caste system in Nepal in my postgraduate studies, and it has some link with the religion. And until we at least address that issue, because Dalits are considered to be the fifth Varna, they are not also part of the Hindu caste system. They are out of the caste system. There are four main castes, and it's called the outcast. So I mean, Manusmriti and the code that was passed in the Jangabadu in 1854 actually brings out, that division is so heavily. Anything you have dealt with this one? How this happened? Of course, sometimes it may be very touchy issue to bring religion into it, but sometimes not ignoring that aspect is also maybe not we are doing justice to the caste system, especially in relation to the Dalits. The issue I see in Nepal, there's not much among the non-Dalit caste issue, though there is higher and lower. But the real issue is between the Dalits and non-Dalits, even in terms of wearing or dining, their identity. So anything somebody can respond to me, how you have handled that issue? Thank you very much.
I mean, the fact that, yes, I mean, the fact that there is clearly a link between Hinduism and the caste system, and specifically Hinduism and the position of Dalits. That there is clearly a link. It's a link which is it's difficult to get exactly and correctly in focus, and because many non-Hindus, many Buddhists, many Muslims, many Christians will say, oh, they will use that link as an excuse to say, oh, we don't have caste. There's no caste in Christianity. But as you well know, there's no caste in Islam. We know that there is. There's no caste in Buddhism. We know that there is. So, it's very convenient to say, oh, it's a problem for Hinduism. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean it's not a problem. It is definitely a problem for Hinduism. And there are some progressive Hindu pundits who've realized this and who've made a point of and obviously we have the outstanding example of Gandhi, who was clearly both a Hindu and very against caste discrimination. But Ambedkar decided that this was impossible, that, Hinduism was not possible to reform and that Dalits should leave Hinduism. Now, the Ambedkarite solution was very clever in the Indian case because Buddhism no longer existed in India, and therefore there wasn't a pre-existing Buddhist establishment that he had to deal with. He was able to recreate Buddhism, from the bottom up in India. Unfortunately for Nepal's Dalits, that is not the case in Nepal. There is a pre-existing Buddhist establishment, which is a combination of high caste Newar Buddhists and Tibetan, very powerful, rich Tibetan institutions, and they're not that keen. They're not that keen on seeing a huge influx of Dalits who might outnumber them within Buddhism. So, although it has occurred to some Buddhist activists in Nepal, but they're ready. They're ready to initiate Dalits into Buddhism. The Dalits are not that keen to go, and the Buddhists are not that keen to have them. So there's a kind of standoff there. So if that, I don't know if that's the kind of answer you were looking for, but that is, and Krishna, I don't know if you want to add anything, but that is my answer on the question of religion. It clearly is connected to religion. Everything is connected to religion. But for now, the vast majority of Nepal's Dalits are content to remain within Hinduism, but some, as you well know, have converted to Christianity. Right, Vidyasagar, you need to take the lead and decide who's asking the next question.
Okay. Yeah. So I think you asked Krishna to answer on that, maybe. Yeah. But now next, Vidyasagar, please go ahead.
Thank you, Shishu, and thank you, David. Thank you, Krishna, for such a thought-provoking presentation and very thorough discussion. I had a privilege to read the text, and while reading, often I encountered the comparative case, while referencing quite, Indian cases with comparing the Indian Dalit scenario and Nepalese Dalit perspective. So I was wondering, there are a couple of questions, probably if you can reflect on this, being a young researcher, some of us very keen to study India, Nepal, Dalit, situations with different, aspect of sociological or anthropological point of view. So if you look at the Indian Dalit situation, especially when it comes to solidarity, we are also receiving solidarity, especially Dalit groups or the Bahujan groups who moved to West, and there's a very strong transnational solidarity was coming from West, even if they moved towards the kind of mobility they have. So what is scenario when it comes to Nepal? The Dalits who are already mobilized and get certain sort of dignity and mobility, moving outside of Nepal, are they equally keen to support the groups who are still struggling within the territory of Nepal? So how the solidarity functions when it comes to across border? So that's the first question probably I wanted to ask. And second, the question of this especially in Indian debates, the question of appropriation is very prevalent and very dominant. Who is writing for whom? So for example, the work of Gopal Guru or Sarukhed, or theoretical Brahmin and empirical Shudras. So when it comes to Nepal, how this debate is there, who is theorizing especially whom? Because the quite good literature is there already in this text. So, but I wanted to also know your reflection, because being an outsider, when you're because you have long experience of exploring or doing ethnography at in Nepal. So how do you see this notion of outsider and also working the community who has experience has not paid much attention to the scholarship within the Nepali academia? Yeah, that's a two very fundamental question I wanted to ask, either Krishna or you can say something on that. And second, from my own experience, I have seen, I come from Bihar, and the quite a number of people from my neighborhood, I know their marriage happened in Nepal. So is there any this marriage debate is there when it comes to Indian Dalits and Nepal Dalits, especially in border state like Bihar? So could you reflect something on that, if possible? Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, on the question of transnational solidarity, I think because the numbers are so much fewer. There is one, yeah, there was one Nepali Dalit intellectual, D.B. Sagar, who went to the US and is now very active in Washington in international Dalit issues. I'm not sure about others. They're not so many as it is the case. It doesn't have such a deep history because of, you know, all the reasons that we've given. You know, when you look at the kind of literacy was virtually non-existent, you know, 50 years ago. So for all those reasons, that's my impression. I haven't made a special study of it, but on appropriation, who has the right? The debate is not as bitter as it is in North America or as it is in India, in Nepal. No, not at all. And this is an issue that will be covered in detail in Michael Hutt's forthcoming work on Dalit literature. So one of the things I'm proud of is that our DSD project managed to get money for Michael Hutt, who's he's the world's leading expert on Nepali literature. Has written many and translated much of Nepali literature, and we managed to get him involved in the Dalit issue. So he's now been doing a lot of work, reading Dalit novels and poetry, meeting Dalit writers. He's published a couple of small things, but he will do a book on Dalit literature from Nepal, which will be important, I think. And that, of course, it's not such a big deal in Nepal. There is not it is possible for non-Dalits to write about Dalit issues without being immediately shot down. But having said that, of course, people are very aware of the issue, you know, and so that's why we made a big effort to include lots of Dalit writers in this book, because it's clearly absurd for non-Dalits to sort of pontificate about Dalit experience when they haven't had that experience themselves. But on the other hand, I don't think it's right to exclude. You know, I think the complete exclusionist strategy is also wrong, in my opinion. And on to cross-border marriage in the Terai, yeah, in the past it was very, very, very common. And in fact, if you look at some of the figures for migration for Nepalis, right at the top of the table for, you know, people born outside the country, because there is so much cross-border marriage, but both, you know, Nepali daughters going to India. And I did some research in the Terai, and I did talk to quite a few people about it. There are, you know, the numbers of women coming into Nepal is actually slightly higher than the number of daughters being sent out to India. And when you ask why, they say, oh, well, you know, Indian social mores are so much tougher. You know, we're sending them they'll be exploited worse by the Indian mother-in-law. So, I mean, that's a clear stereotype and cliche. I have no idea. You know, that's just I'm just repeating what things people say. I have no idea whether there's any truth in that. But there is a trend, though, that kind of the existence of the international border, even though it's an open border, is starting to make a difference. It is starting to make a difference. The border is hardening. There is a process of hardening going on. It's becoming more difficult. And I think the frequency of marriage is declining. It is declining. Compared to the past. So it's not as open, it's not as obvious. It's become much harder to own property in both countries, you know, and live in India but have property in Nepal and vice versa. So for all those reasons, I think, you know, it's on decline. Whether it'll disappear altogether, that's a totally different matter. I don't know.
Right. Can I add a couple of points here?
Sure.
I mean,
Please.
agree with David about the solidarity and you know, the collaborations. I think the Nepal's case is very much you know, the case for Dalit is very much work out, you know, in a more collaborative way from within Nepal. And I think we have written about this, the Nepal's Dalit movement, despite this being short, you know, in some sense, you know, but there are activists who are very proud that they have made a lot more gain compressed in short period of time than in India. And because the issue we talk about Dalits, you know, whether it's right to put it into only the silos of Dalit because it's not them who created it, you know, is also very, very important point. Maybe that's useful for social change. About cross-border marriages, I think the other point, apart from what David said, is that the difference between the, you know, the value of Indian currency and Nepali rupees and the Dalit system being more prevalent in India than Nepal, maybe relatively. So bringing a Bahu daughter-in-law from India maybe is more beneficial than, than giving away your daughter to India, because then it converts Nepali money to IC. But that could be one small reason. But I think it's happening fairly at good rate, but maybe there's, a small decline there.
Oh, that's interesting to know about the marriage thing. Yeah. And now over to Hari Prasad, and then after Bhakta Guru. Yeah, Hari Prasad, please unmute yourself.
Audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful talk. Similar to earlier speakers mentioned, I also would like to draw parallels and also ask some questions which are presented here. So I understand that I haven't read that book yet, but when we mentioned Dalits in Search of Inclusion, so does the book also looks at the inclusion, how they in search of inclusion means how do they did over the years, like in protest, through human rights movements, or through the easier, better process than social change, like technology innovation. For example, in sanitation sector, we have technology innovation, which I am working on, and other support programs of the government. So while we say in search of inclusion, is it through the social means, which is still difficult to see when you see that when they come back from abroad, they are still not ready to uh, take part away from the caste system. They're continuing it, but things like technology has little bit liberated, for example, in terms of manual scavenging and other aspects, I feel, but still it is long way to go even in India. I would like to listen about that. And secondly, when you mentioned in the summary limited occupational successes, so I don't know whether I got confused, or things like sanitation work and other continuing through generation occupations, is it still ongoing, or it is different in the from the interviews, you are getting a different result that the occupational successes are not followed? And second doubt is out about inter-Dalit marriages being violent. Why is it so? Is there any issues? I know that Dalits within the caste system, within the Dalits, they are stronger and they are having issues, but is it inter-Dalit marriages violent? Did I write it correctly, or did I mistook something? And third is about the internal variations in terms of economy. So when we say what is internal variations also, does it mean that there are people within the Dalits who are rich as well as poor, or economically better or worse off? So these are the three questions and the point about the in search of inclusion over the years. Thank
you. Maybe there's some things David want to say. I think when I say we say about the limitations of the occupational successes, we're trying to say that despite race literacy, there are very few people from the Dalit community who have been able to go to university. And translating the ethos, aspirations into the occupational successes, that's not happening as yet, even though it's just, that a small number of groups are starting, are showing up. We have very few, I think a handful, maybe the permanent university lecturers from Dalit community, for example. Inter-Dalit marriage violence, I think the violence I was talking about is very general. Dalit, non-Dalit marriages. There have been many cases. Since you are also doing research in Nepal, you must have followed the cases that the Dalit, there's a huge massacre when Navraj Bhikhe and others, the Dalit went to get a Thakuri girl. 5 or 6 people were drowned in the river, even though the case has now been concluded and the perpetrators have been jailed now. I mean, that's at least some good news there. But this hasn't happened in all other cases. The Dalit inter-Dalit marriages I was talking about, especially Tarai. I mean, it hasn't taken place, so so we don't know the cases of violence. I'm sure violence would be the answer there. but having said that, we have a chapter by Tilak Vishwakarma, which David highlighted, that there is a system of Majan in which the Dalit women's caste status can be raised with certain compensation system out there. Inter-Dalit variations in terms of economic status. Yes, you can see that the small group of goldsmiths, for example, are definitely relatively much better, much richer, and when we are trying to do our interviews, some of the people from that group were not very interested about the idea of Dalit, being interviewed about Dalit themselves. There are groups like that, and also hierarchy among Dalits exists, and more so in Tarai. And there is differences between I mean, it was very surprising to see that why the Hill Dalit were more poorer, but in terms of Human Development Index, obviously Hill Dalits were better than the Tarai Dalits. In our own study case, for example, the Mijars, who are the previous leather workers, called Sarki category, they were more successful than the rest, to generate income, to save and reinvest it into properties, and also eventually to send their sons to places like Korea and to earn more money. So there are cases of, yes, these variations there. At least we experienced. Thank you. And maybe David can answer the other thing.
No, that's fine. I think you covered it all. I mean, whether to what extent
technology and other things, David, you can speak maybe. I don't know. The manual scavenging.
No, that is a good question. It's not something I mean, that actually goes back to the initial question by Balgopal. Why haven't you looked at Newar Dalits? They are involved in sewerage work, and that's not an area we've investigated at all. And it's definitely something that needs more research. So I can't say. Obviously, in the village environment, they're not. The Dalits, don't. There's non-urban in the kind of in the rural areas. People either go in the fields or they have nowadays a lot of places have their own cesspits, and so it's kind of independent. And whether there's any connection between caste and the people who work in producing that, I'm not aware. Yeah, it's not such a big issue, and but actually that is now that you raise it, that the fact that the Newar Dalits are excluded from the Dalit category may have one unintended consequence of that may be that the issue of scavenging, the manual scavenging issue, hasn't been raised in Nepal in the way it should have been. So thank you for that question. That's definitely something to look into.
Now I would like to request Bhakt Gurung for your question, and then after Harshita. If anyone has more question, since we are moving out of time, so yes, we'll wind up after 2 questions, and maybe we can take one more. Yeah, Bhakt, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Shishu, for your time, and thank you for David and Krishna for this very insightful and very nice presentation. And this the information I got is very interesting, very useful. And then I think this study, I have seen how Krishna was doing very hard work, going to village to village and district to district in Nepal in different times, and collecting data and analyzing and making this book, bringing to us in this shape. So this hard work will prescribe to Nepal, actually, even to the Nepali government as well. Because this is, I think, the case of the about 20%, 1/5 of the population in Nepal, I think, who are so-called Dalit categories. I born in Armola village, very small village, Krishna knows that. And even in my village, very small village, but we have very neatly composed these different kinds of caste people living together. We have Gurung communities in my village, Gurungs, Brahmins, Kshatris, then Kami we call Vishwakarma, and Sarki we call Bijar now, Nepali, and we have Pariyar community. So we have very, very good, very nice community living together, each other, and working together as well. Very good example of this, joint community in my village. And I think this book will give, in our society, actually, very bad thing is untouchability and forbid to go to get inside our home. We are not permitted to the Dalit communities to get in. But even though they built that house, actually, so it is very shameful thing. This untouchability, discrimination, and not to allow to sit together and eat together and get in our houses. These practices are still in our society, in my village, in my place, everywhere in Nepal. So I think this book will bring some knowledge, and we urgently need to do something, how to reform these kinds of social system. This is a kind of social system which is very deeply rooted inside our Nepali community, not only in Nepal. It is the case of in India as well. The friends from India, they have already explained. So I think this book will give some prescription. But David already told that they don't have such prescription what to do in the next. So my question is, there is the labor division, a kind of primitively, made the labor division among the Dalit community. Like Vishwakarma, they will do mostly the metal work, and like metal means like different kinds of manufacturing things. We can, in modern life, we can say manufacturing things. Sarki, or we say Mijar or Nepali, their actually occupation is divided to do coffler, like to make shoes, everything like working with the leather. And then the Pariyar's occupation is something like fashion design or making clothes, something like this. So why we cannot tell to the community or governments or whatever to recommend them to make this occupational practices?
And so sorry
more.
to interrupt in between. Actually, there are some more questions, and we are moving out of time. So
Okay.
if
So
you brief, that would be fine. Yeah.
can we recommend to make this occupation, the division, to modernize? One thing is that, and another thing is, I wanted to know in Nepal, some 20% people are Dalit. So where are they come from in Nepal? What is their historical transaction to come to Nepal? I think if somebody gave me this, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bhakta. Now I would like to ask Harshita to raise a question, and then after, I'm sorry to miss Mayur. After Harshita, Mayur, please be ready with your discussion. Thank you.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, but I think your voice is a bit disturbed. Can you speak again?
Is it fine?
I think you have some problem with your voice. Okay. Meanwhile, when you are setting up your mic,
Yeah,
Mayur.
is it fine now? Is it fine? Hello?
Okay. David, can you hear it properly?
Yeah, I can hear. It's a bit of an echo, but I can hear. Yeah.
Thank you, Ranjan, for conducting this lecture smoothly, and thank you, Professor David and Krishna, for such a deep account on caste dynamics and transition in Nepal. My question is, out of the curiosity, that how Dalit resistance, especially Dalit youth resistance, help Dalits in reclaiming the spaces of arts like music, paintings, and poetry, and does it help them in challenge the stereotypes? Like, or is it the imitation of that upper caste norms and belief by normalizing the absenteeism of women? For instance, like today on social media, we have seen that there is a Dalit youth resistance, but it comes with this proud Chamar caste or proud Chapri caste. But then it's not, it's undermines the role of feminine roles and reinforce the same masculine and patriarchal rituals. So, I mean, how this gender dynamics working within the Dalits in Nepal? Can you shed a light on it, if possible?
Right. Do you want to take all the questions, or shall we answer?
And there's also, I see there's also a question in the chat from Sonam Lama about the Newar Dalits. Yes. On the question of resistance through art, yeah, I'm not sure that, I mean, I'm not an expert on this at all. I do know, I mean, and somebody should do a study of it. I'm not sure, I don't know whether this will be included in the Michael Hart study or not. What's very interesting is that in 2008 to 9, Comrade Ahuti, as I say, one leading Dalit poet, he produced a TV serial called Dulan, which was all about the caste issue. And that was a very important time in Nepal. It was a very revolutionary time. It was just after the Maoists had come into the mainstream, but they'd had a huge impact. It was at the point when the monarchy was abolished. It was the point when secularism was introduced and the Constituent Assembly was just starting. The Maoists won the election of 2008. So it was a revolutionary time. Things have certainly changed now, but and society was ready for that message. So it's now, over 15 years old, that, but it's definitely somebody should study that, the impact of that serial, and whether and how audience reception about it, and just study the plot as well. I haven't watched it. I've watched certain little clips, but not the whole thing. So there was that. But in terms of contemporary art, I'm not so sure. I mean, interesting. I mean, it certainly gets into the the public sphere. A few years back, there was one of the most, in a way, also the person who should be here answering these questions is music. I mean, folk song music is incredibly important in Nepali culture. And Anna Stur is an American anthropologist, teaches at Hawaii, who is very, very fluent in Nepali, and is a performer also, capable of performing Dohuri Geet, and many of you may have seen her performing on YouTube. You can see her. So she's so good at Nepali and at music that she's able to actually perform, and can command high salaries for doing so, as an American, blonde American performing Nepali songs. And so a few years back there was a song, very popular song, where the singers got into trouble. The singers were Pashupati Sharma, I think, and something Casey. They were kind of high caste, basically singers, and they were singing a song about an anti-caste song. And the song basically went, "We're all Nepalis, there is no caste." And it was incredibly, I mean, even I found it an unbelievably moving song, because it was about intercaste marriage, and it was moving precisely because it was so contrary to fact. But it was the message of the song was very much in the right place. But some young Dalit activists got very upset about it, because the song used these colloquial terms that we've actually mentioned here in this talk as well, and didn't use the honorific terms, because in the context of singing a folk song, it would be very artificial to use the honorific caste names. Very artificial. It's not how people talk. But nonetheless, anyway, the song can still be seen on YouTube, I believe. So that's a kind of roundabout answer. It doesn't really answer your question about in terms of figurative art. I'm not sure, but I believe there are some active Dalit artists, but I'm absolutely the wrong person to ask about this. Krishna, I don't know whether you have more to say. I mean, there's also we could also mention the Badi, the controversy over the representations of the Badi caste.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, maybe art. I don't know whether art has come in a big way as we like, but as you said that through poems, for example, the songs, TV shows, and even films, and these films that are supposed to inspire social reforms also have been registered by at least one very small Dalit caste group called Badi in Nepal. They are the ones, I think, they who brought the first case in Nepal against the two movies and sorry, two novels and one movie. And when it comes about resistance from the feminist movements from the Dalit perspective, I think the case often highlighted is about Badi women protesting against the state. That's fighting the very successful case about against the stigma attached to what they call is kind of the prostitution level collectively against the bodies and so forth. And this has been covered in one of the chapters in our book here, and this case have been highlighted. There's a book published by Kathmandu Photo Circle, I think, on the quest for dignity, which collects a lot of photographs from taken by Peace Corps volunteers and foreigners in the past. Other than that, I think the poetry and literature is a more powerful medium I've seen. As David is right, that maybe we'll have to wait for Michael's book to come out. I don't know about the art as such. I haven't seen much even in social media. Maybe you have.
The question does go back to Vidyasaga's question about representation, who has the right to represent, and certainly the Badi case raised that issue very powerfully, because you had novels written by high caste men that were representing Badi women in a way that the Badi community themselves felt was insulting, and it went right up to into the court case, and so definitely raised those issues.
Yeah, Dr. Gurung's observation, I think he made a case describing his village. Nepal's Dalit population, 20%, he says that is very disputed anyway. I mean, the national census constantly showing 13+%. Though Dalit activists believe that there's an undercount, and there may be as much as 20% Dalit population in Nepal. And this recommendation of modernization, I mean, this when Dalits perform certain kind of occupation, there is a stigma attached to it. But when other people adopt this out of profit, and this stigma just disappear. So how do we go about it? Is a huge question. For example, the tailor shops we see in the town, city and towns run by non-Dalits become boutique shops, and there is no caste stigma attached there. When the muggers and others take up the panchabaj, role of musicians, there is no caste stigma attached to it. But when Dalit do it, and the caste stigma is there. That's why it's discouraging people. The whole of the Dalit community, the skills, the science, the knowledge, indigenous, they hide. The heritage, if you like, is also at the risk of being extinguished there. So so many recommendations have been made in modernization and to support local governments also. Are asked to support Dalits to in their livelihood, to preserve their occupation. But how can they do that without sacking off, with keeping the stigma of untouchability? Is a huge question, and there's no, I don't think, easy answer to press button or recommendation something. is a big question for us to, for everyone, from the time of Ambedkar to the, present day scholars, by activists and the policymakers, all, are facing this conundrum of how do we go about annihilation of the caste. Is a huge question. Nobody knows the answer. I mean, everybody's trying to incrementally to improve.
Yeah, thank you.
Just say
Krishna.
a couple of small things before we finish. And on the 20% figure, yeah, I don't think it can be possible that Dalits are 20%. It may be 1 or 2% undercounted. But one thing one point I only became aware of very recently is, of course, many Dalits are living in urban areas on rent. And in order to get the rental properties which they live in, they have to hide their caste. They have to they use their clan name, or they use some high caste surname. They do not tell the landlord that they are Dalits, because they want to avoid problems. They don't want to be kicked out. So when the census takers come around, they don't say that they're Dalits, because they don't want to lose their rent. That's where they live. They don't want. So that is one very clear reason why Dalits might be undercounted, because they're giving their surnames as a Chetri surname or whatever. On the question in the chat from Sonam Lama, is there any connection between Newar Dalits being excluded from the Dalit community because of their association with both Buddhism and Hinduism? No, that's not the case. If their leaders were to come forward and say, we want to be included among Dalits, they could be included. They're not being excluded, they're excluding themselves, and they're doing that because they've been persuaded that it's better for them to be Newars than to be Dalits. In fact, they're both, but in actual sociological fact, they're both, but it's not because of the association with Buddhism and Hinduism. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, thank you. Mayur, are you there? If you're there, kindly ask a question, and then after we'll move to wind up this session and then we'll announce for the next lecture. Mayur, are you there? Okay. Yeah, Mayur, please unmute yourself and please go ahead.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have just two, three questions, very short question. One is that many times we compare with Indian caste system and Nepal caste system, and then like in presentation, I found one missing thing. What about, is there any kind of middle caste, like for example, we call it a Shudra 4 Varna? Is there any Varna Shudras, particularly one? And if it is there, what kind of the socioeconomic status existing is there? One. And secondly, what about 2021 census status? Like, is there any controversy around census regarding to caste? And then third question I want to ask, like, for example, like when Ambedkar also went to Nepal and he wanted to satyagraha, the same temple, like Pashupati temple. So, is there any native Dalit leader in a content, like native ideal anti-caste leader now they can follow them or they are following him or her? Just only three questions. Thank you.
Is there any Shudra caste? No, I mean, that's what I was trying to say when, right at the very beginning, when I said that the Janajatis, which technically are tribals, if you like, they occupy the OBC position that you would be familiar with from North India, right? So the sort of the quote unquote clean caste group that is high in number, relatively deprived, largely tenant farmers and so on, that you would be familiar with from UP and Bihar, that group doesn't really exist. What you have is the Bahans and Chetris at the top, who of course mostly are also peasant farmers, and then you have Janajatis below them, and then below that you then have the different groups of Dalits. So that OBCs, if you like, in the Nepal context, OBCs are replaced by Janajatis. That's the thing. So I mean, yeah, you can call them Shudras if you want to. That before the term Janajati was invented, they were considered like Shudras by the end, the 1854 Mulika N national caste legislation. They were called Matwali, they were the groups which had the right to drink alcohol. The high castes, the Tagadari, the wearers of the sacred thread, were not supposed to drink alcohol. Of course, in practice, many of them did. They would go to Janajati households and drink alcohol, but as a caste, they were not supposed to drink alcohol. So that I hope that answers your question about where are the Shudras. So these Janajati groups counted as Shudras, if you like, in the Muluki Ain, which basically dominated how caste was treated between 1854 and 1963. Is there any controversy in the census regarding the caste? No, that is the surprising thing, is that in 1991 they decided we will collect caste figures, and it's been relatively uncontroversial. The only things that have been controversial is which groups to recognize. Okay, now at the moment there are, I think, 56, 57 Janajati groups that are recognized. Some groups have disappeared. One or two groups, very small groups, have disappeared. Other new groups have come forward. There was a report. The government, I've forgotten the dates on this, but the government commissioned a senior anthropologist from the university to make a new report on which groups to include in the Janajati. And he came back, and if his report had been actioned, the number of Janajati groups would have gone up to about 80 something. But it wasn't. It was just the report was buried. So there's a little bit of controversy about which caste to recognize, and there are also some cases where the census takers simply don't understand the local ethnographic realities. So when I was doing some research in Parsa district down on the border next to Bihar, near to Raksal, we surveyed several villages, and we discovered that census had got it completely wrong. There was one caste group that, because the census, presumably the census takers were coming from the hills, they didn't understand the local realities of we found this group that was listed as Janajati. They were not Janajati. They'd just made a mistake. So there are kind of ethnographic mistakes, but there's not in terms, and also there are kind of accusations of inaccuracy. So the numbers of Buddhists being supposedly lower, the number of Dalits supposedly being lower than they should be, and blah, blah, blah. There's those kind, but huge controversies around collecting caste data. No, there is no, it's not, unlike in India today, where there's big resistance to having a caste census. That seems to have, that does not seem to be controversial in the Nepalese context, at least not for the moment. And on Ambedkar going to Nepal, yes, he did go to Nepal in the year that he died, and he gave his lecture, Buddha versus Marx, in Nepal. I don't know the exact history about trying to enter Pashupati, but certainly that was around the time when Sahasranath Kapali, whom I mentioned earlier, was trying to get into Pashupati, and have a campaign to allow Dalits to go in. Is there any leader of his? No. I mean, that's one of the things in one of the essays in this book we do discuss, is why unfortunately there isn't a leader of that stature of Ambedkar, that level of education, that level of importance. Unfortunately, the Nepal Dalit movement could use somebody of that stature, and it doesn't have it at the moment. Unfortunately, they have some very good leaders, but not of Ambedkar's stature. No.
Okay.
Do you want to add to that?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think maybe this is the final concluding remarks. Yeah. As David highlighted, I think that the Nepal's caste system, as it was very much enforced by law with the Mulukian in 1854. It wasn't basically, I mean, often people make mistake to say that it was a model on the 4 Varna models. I mean, it was, it was taken as a basis, but it didn't follow the model at all, in a sense. There was 3 groups, as David said, and the idea that the Dalit being outside as an outcast, and the 4th, as Balkrishna highlighted, that is his reading of the Indian system, and that you may find that in Tarai, but not in the hill. Yeah, of course, Nepal's caste system was very much modeled in the continuum of purity and pollution, yes, and that's why the untouchability and other things existed.
One thing, sorry, can I just add on that? Just
Yeah.
one footnote to that. If you're interested, you can download an excellent English translation of the whole of the Muluki Ain of 1854 from the Heidelberg University website, produced by the law scholars in there. And you can, if you read the English translation, you will see immediately how it's been modelled on the Dharma Shastras, they've taken the Dharmashastric teachings and they've tried to adapt them to the ethnographic realities of Nepal in the middle of the 19th century. So it's a fascinating read.
Right. The 2021 census, David talked generally about the census taking and controversy, but the why 2021 census data on caste ethnicity and disaggregated data by caste ethnicity hasn't published? I don't know. I mean, they were very late. There was a small controversy there, I think, and they didn't publish population by caste ethnicity, and they had to do a year of negotiation and so on, which they published. But we, I don't know. I just had a chat with a colleague in Kathmandu. We need to find out why cannot we have, it's been now 3 years, those data by, education and other aspects by caste and ethnicity. Maybe there were some technical issues, maybe there were some errors, I don't know. Yeah, David answered about the Ambedkar. Right, thank you.
Yes, so now we are at the end of the session right now. So before winding up the session, we would like to announce that Speaking for Margin, again, using the series of academic lecture series 2024, tomorrow on 29th of December, the session will be happening, that is bridging the gap between theory and practice, practitioner's perspective, and the speaker would be Sweta Agarwal. She is an IS officer. She is currently serving as additional district magistrate in Purba Bardhaman, and the chair of the session would be Professor Nasreen Chaudhary. She is a professor at Department of Political Science, Delhi University. So I would like to request all the participants to join the session and spread our words to scholars who are planning to work in such area. Now, I would like to thank Professor David for your precious time giving us to all the scholars who are present over there, and and Krishna also, that you provided an insight to the context of Nepali Dalits, and we could imagine that how complex things are there in Indian context as well as in Nepal context. And while I was going through the introduction, I was surprised to see one thing I just would like to put. So there are two kinds of Dalit: water unacceptable and untouchable, and another one is water unacceptable but touchable. So this was very, I it stuck in my mind, and I would like to know more about it. But yeah, giving the time constraint, once again, I would like to thank Professor David and Krishna for your time, and I would like to thank all the participants for your thought-provoking questions around Nepali Dalits and social political angle to it. Also, I would like to thank Vidya Sagar for running this session, Speaking for Margin team, to conduct this session for the students who come from very low socioeconomic background and wanting to pursue academia and bring critical perspective to this area. So once again, thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks. We'll wind up the session right now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.